ask Joe to play that song because I feel like it really leads into what we're talking about today. We've been in a series for a couple weeks now, talking about leaders with a limp. And by the way, I'm David Martin. I'm the youth pastor. I probably should introduce who I am. For those of you that don't know me, as Bill mentioned, Tyler is in Bulgaria right now. So be praying for him and Evan and Matt as they are serving over there. They're loving on the guys that they're going to be hiking with and sharing the gospel with over there. They're truly living worship in their lives by following God's call in their lives and sharing the gospel. So really exciting time for them and really exciting time. I'm praying for them hard because I really do feel like that is of utmost importance. It's just sharing the gospel. But we are talking about Elijah today. A lot of people look at Elijah and they know these big stories of Elijah, and they know, some of the little bits of his life, but there's a lot in Elijah's life that as even I was studying, I've read the Bible, but it never clicked to me like, this guy was legit. Like, this guy was like, if I'm a false prophet, I'm scared of this guy. And, I was thinking as I was going through this week, I was thinking about heroes. All through high school, I watched my brother run cross country. I didn't run cross country until my senior year. I love the sport. I think it's one of the most telling, most difficult sports that is out there. You can argue with me until your face is blue, but I really do. If you've never gone and run 3.1 miles at one time at a race pace, it's not an easy task. It's not an easy thing to do. And so I was thinking through my heroes, and all through high school, I heard about this guy by the name of Steve Prefontaine. Anyone heard of Steve Prefontaine? There's a few of y'all. Steve Prefontaine, greatest American runner, long distance in history. Guy was too short. He had one leg that was shorter than the other. He was not the kind of guy that you would think would be a runner. He ran off of just raw competitiveness. He was not one of those guys that went out and paced himself. He just ran. He's got so many great quotes. One of my favorite is, to give anything less than the best is to waste the gift. Just a really powerful idea of we are given a gift that we are able to do. We shouldn't be wasting it. And giving anything less than what we can is wasting the gift that God has given us. I think that's a very powerful quote. And just incredible runner, held every American distance record from the mile all the way up to the 10,000 meters at one point in his career. Like, no one's ever done that in America. Goes to the Olympics, runs the best 10,000 meter of his life, is in first place coming down the final stretch, and gets passed by three guys. Finishes fourth place. And it breaks him because he wants to win. He's just a fiery competitor. He goes out and he trains, but he has a lingering problem. As with every hero that we have here on earth, there's some kind of lingering problem. There's some kind of thing within them that is their thorn in their side. And for him, it was alcoholism. Unfortunately, before the Olympics come back around, he would be driving his car intoxicated in Oregon and would flip it. No one would find him until the next morning, and he passed away before he was able to really get his chance to redo what he had done 4 years before. But how true is that for all our heroes? I mentioned it. We all have a thorn in the side. And Elijah did too. Elijah is this great man, and we're going to read through his story, and we're going to see all of this amazing stuff that he did. God worked through him in powerful ways. Like there's no one that works more miracles like he does. He's just such a powerful character, but I love how James writes about him. In James 5, 17 and 18, don't want to turn there. James he's speaking on prayer here. But I think the words that he uses describe Elijah and every other man in history. It says in James 5, 17 and 18, Elijah was a human being, even as we are. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crop. But he starts out with this idea that Elijah is a man, just as we are. He does powerful things. He's a hero. Yet, he has faults. And he has times of trouble in his life. So we're going to talk about those here as we talk about a man leading with a limp. So, in 1 Kings 17, we start with the story of Elijah. He comes out, and he's just thrown out at us. Here, we have no background, and all of a sudden it says, now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain for the next few years except at my word. So we get introduced to Elijah, and immediately we've got something going on. He's like, look, it's not going to rain unless I pray for rain. Because that's who I serve, God, and God has allowed me to do this. And I'm praying that there's not going to be rain because y'all are following false idols. They're following Baal. And this Baal was the god who was brought rains and bountiful harvest. And so they're worshiping this false god. And here Elijah says, y'all want to worship that God? Y'all think he brings the rain? Y'all think he brings the bountiful harvest? Guess what? I'm going to pray to God, the real God, that doesn't happen. And he's going to show you who the real God is. Oh, and he does. Multiple times. And so there's this drought on the land. And immediately, Elijah is in danger. And so God tells Elijah there in chapter 17, verses 2 through 6, he says, Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, Leave there, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. So he did what the Lord told him. He went to the Kerith ravine, east of Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. This is wild to me. Has anybody ever watched ravens, seen what ravens do? Are ravens the type of bird that are gonna share anything? No. But what does God do? He makes these ravens not only go and get meat and bread, but take it to Elijah twice a day. God provides for Elijah in this time. It's a scary time for the prophets of God. We'll find out later in the story, Obadiah is hiding 200 prophets, 100 in each cave. And they're only getting a little bit of sustenance that Obadiah can provide for them. Yet Elijah is getting fed by ravens. That's crazy to me because that's just not the type of bird that you would think would be caring like that enough to bring him bread and meat. But yet God provides using the most unlikely thing. And so he survives this danger for a while until the brook dries up and he's out of water. And so God says, all right, Elijah, it's time to move. So then we go to this story, and he goes across to the northern part of the kingdom, and he meets this widow. And the widow, he's told to talk to this widow and ask for a little bread. To take flour, and he asked this widow to make bread for him. And the widow has just a very interesting reply here. She says, "As surely as the Lord God, your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to make a home, to take home and make a meal for myself and my son. That way we may eat and die." This is probably, at this time, very common because of the drought. People like this are probably just trying to survive, and they're surviving as long as they can, and she is literally on the last of her meals, and God sends Elijah to her. And I'm sure Elijah's going, okay, you were feeding me with ravens, and I was eating to what my satisfaction every morning and every night with meat and bread, and I had water, and now you're going to send me to this widow who doesn't even have enough for herself and her son to live off of. But Elijah has faith. And he goes and he says to her, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day of the Lord sends the rain on the land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run out dry, in keeping with the word the Lord has spoken by Elijah. So here we have God doing crazy things in Elijah's life. He's providing. He's allowing Elijah sustenance. He's providing for this widow and her family who was literally on her last leg, about to just eat the last of her food and hope that they can find food somewhere else. And yet God provides over and over and over. But just as God provides, we run into a bump in the story. And this widow's son dies. And she comes to Elijah, and obviously upset, and basically calls him out and is like, "Why have you come here just to have me die, or to have my son die? Do you hate us? Do you hate us that much that you will keep us alive just to have us die in a different way?" And we see Elijah's first struggle, because Elijah himself doesn't come at the woman and go, "Look, this is God's plan. Just deal with it." How often do we approach somebody that's gone through a loss and say, "This is God's plan. He's just doing it's God's working all things together." And that's not what they want to hear. But Elijah himself goes to God, and he questions God. Elijah says, then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Elijah doesn't try to act like he's got all the answers. And he questions God, who's provided for him, who's done miraculous things to this point in his life. Just the two things that we've read about are miraculous in Elijah's life. And yet, what does Elijah do? "Why would you do this, God?" Leading with a limp is recognizing that we don't have all the answers. We don't know the answer to everything, and God does. What we need to know about God is that he is omniscient. Omniscient is just a big fancy word that we learn in seminary that means that God knows all. He knows everything, present, past, future. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what's in our mind. He knows everything. Why? Because he's the creator of it all. And he has this knowledge of what it is. And he knows why things are happening. And he understands how it all is going to fit together in the end. And so he's omniscient, but he's also omnipotent. Meaning he can do anything he wants to. He's God. He created it all. He can do anything he wants to. So Elijah comes to him and doesn't just question him, and he doesn't just say, well, God, I don't know why you did this, so I'm just going to sit here. No, he goes to him and he tells God, heal this boy. Heal this boy. And he lays across the boy 3 times, and the boy is raised from the dead. And another miracle happens. Part of leading with a limp is understanding we don't know, but God does. And we have to lean on God because we can't. We're just man. Just as Elijah was, we're just a man. We're just humans. Broken creatures. We don't have it all together. Have any of y'all tried to create something anytime soon out of nothing? How'd that go for you? It didn't, right? Because we don't have that power, and we have to recognize that we don't have the power that God does. He has the power to do miracles. He has the power to provide for us, and we have to trust in Him. We talked this morning in Youth Sunday School. We've been walking through Matthew, and we're in Matthew 8. And all of Matthew 8, there's this picture of faith. And the disciples are in the boat, and the storm comes, and Jesus is asleep, and they wake him up and say, God, Jesus, don't let us die. And what does Jesus tell them? Who knows? Ye of what? Little faith. Not because they didn't have some faith that Jesus could, but they didn't have total faith in Jesus. We have to have total faith that God can provide, that God knows what He's doing. And so Elijah celebrates with the woman, and sometime later, God says, all right, Elijah, it's time to face Ahab. It's time to go face the king and his wife and these prophets of Baal. Go meet them. And along the way, he meets Obadiah. And Obadiah is the king's servant. He's one of his advisors. And Obadiah is scared because Obadiah has been saving these other prophets. He put them in caves. He's been sending them bread. And he's like, look, the king's wanted your head for a long time. If I go back to him without you, he's going to have my head. And then those guys are going to die. And Elijah's like, no, that's not going to happen. Tell Ahab to meet me. And so Obadiah has faith, and he goes and meets him. And then we have the best part of this, well, not the best part, this is my second favorite part of this whole Elijah story. It's the showdown on the mountain. We've all heard it. We've all seen Elijah's awesome, what God's done on the mountain with Elijah praying to him. What the story says is that these prophets of Baal come, and he's like, hey, y'all build an altar, I'll build an altar. Y'all pray to your God, I'll pray to my God. And ask them that. Y'all ask y'all's God to bring fire from heaven, and I'll ask my God to bring fire from heaven and take the altar, or take the sacrifice. And so the prophets of Baal go up, they build their altar, they start praying and doing all their stuff. And what does Elijah do? He sits back and he watches. And he waits. And he waits. And finally he goes, hey, maybe your God's asleep. He makes fun of them. He's like, guys, maybe you should yell louder. Your God might be asleep. He realizes, hey, these are false prophets. This is a false God. I don't have anything to worry about. And so he sits back and he waits, and these prophets, they just finally give up. And Elijah's like, all right, I got you. So he goes and builds an altar. He puts all the meat on the altar, the wood, and he says, hey, go down to the river and get jars of water and dump them on top of the altar. Not only am I going to have God bring fire down from heaven, but I'm going to make it harder for that to be burned up. Not only does he do that, but when he prays, God bring this fire from heaven, God brings the fire and takes everything. Just takes the whole altar with him. Like just fire from heaven, no altar. And Elijah sits there and he's like, told you. He looks at everyone that's there that's not the prophets of Baal and he says, grab them and kill them because they're false. And that happens. And the story goes on that Elijah looks to the ocean, to the sea, and he sees, or they go back 7 times looking for this cloud, and finally they see this little bitty cloud, and he goes to Ahab and says, go home, prepare for the rain. The rain's finally going to come. And then we have this really cool, interesting part of the story that it says that Elijah was filled with the Spirit. He tucks his cloak into his belt, and he runs ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way back. Dude, Usain bolts it out of there. Like, the entire way back to where the palace was. Crazy. And so here's this wonderful, awesome mountain that they're on where God has provided victory for Elijah. He's seen God provide miracles. He's seen God raise a boy from the dead. He's been on the mountain where God brought fire and he had a major victory. The rains come, and then Jezebel steps in. And Jezebel says to Ahab, kill him. He's poisoning your mind, kill him. And what does Elijah do? He turns tail and he runs. Not just runs, but in 1 Kings 19, verse 3, he says, then he was afraid. He arose and ran for his life, then came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. He's depressed. He's at the bottom here. He's lost his will to live. It's enough. Take my life, God. I've seen it all, but now he's fearing for his life after he just watched God bring fire from heaven, after he's been provided for. Think about being human, about being a leader that's going to have a limp. Sometimes we misplace where our vision is. We start focusing on what's going on around us. We start focusing on the things that are bringing us down. And when we take our focus off of God, this is what happens. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about depression. I think this is a very important topic that has become more and more welcome to be talked about, but definitely needs to be talked about. There's some stats here. According to the World Health Organization, 14% of those aged 12 to 25 face depression. In 2020, 264 million people suffered from depression worldwide. In 2017, 17.3 million adults in America had at least one major depressive episode. College depression rates from 2013 to 2018 of severe depression rose from 9.4% to 21.1%. Moderate and severe rates from 2007 to 2018 in those same college students rose from 23.2% to 41.1%. Nearly half of college students had some kind of depressive episode during their time that year, in 2018. It's real in our world, and it was real with Elijah. Depression's not a joke. Anxiety is not a joke. And it's not a weakness. It doesn't make you weak. It's part of my story. Not just some guy that's always had it together. I've been at the bottom. I've wanted to die. I had anxiety that was so crushing that it nearly destroyed me. But here's the beauty of this story, because I stopped reading there when Elijah was scared and he was depressed and he just wanted to die. And it says that he fell asleep under a broom tree. But it says, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And he looked and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he rose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. This has kind of been picked up by TikTok. There's people that post this, and it's talking about all Elijah needed was a snack and a nap, and he was ready to go. And that's true. That's all Elijah needed. And sometimes we need rest. We've talked about that. But sometimes there's more to this picture than we need rest, or we need to take a step back in our lives. Sometimes we need more help. This is a plug that I don't feel bad about making, because I truly believe every person should be in counseling at one point. Natalie loves it, because that was said at camp, and I heard her, yes. But it's true. I really do believe it. We all face things that we struggle with. I believe that. But what I really believe is that God gives Elijah the tools to deal with his depression. He gives Elijah the tools to deal with the struggles that he's facing. And you have struggles in your life. And God provides tools. And we can't be afraid to use those tools in those struggles that we're facing. It's not weakness to go to counseling. It's not weakness to have medicine that helps you deal with something. I believe totally that God provides those tools. Houston sees people daily, I'm sure, that need those tools and probably some of them have resisted those tools for a long time because they were afraid. And I'm just going to plug Houston and his ministry. I think it's a wonderful ministry. And if you are facing something, God's given you those tools. Use them. Because he wants you to have the strength to continue on this journey. Elijah got the tools. He used them. He took them and he ate and he rested. And then he went on his journey. And what's interesting is he makes his way here after this moment to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God where Israel was and received word from God. And he goes there and he hides in the cave, and God says, go out on the mountain and listen for me there. And all these crazy things happen, it's like the day after tomorrow comes through, and all these different storms happen, and an earthquake happens, and fire happens, and God's in none of them. And then in the still quiet, God speaks to him. And he listens, and God says, all right, this is what you're going to do. And he sends them back. And he sends them and says, you're going to go back, and you're going to continue your work. But I'm giving you someone else to help you. I'm giving you Elisha. And he goes and finds Elisha plowing in the fields. And the story goes that he passes on the mantle to Elisha, and Elisha comes and follows him. And some things happen. You have Ahab comes back, and he does some things that aren't so kosher. He goes in and takes a vineyard, and he, within that vineyard, kills the vineyard owner because he wouldn't sell to him. And Elijah comes to him and says, hey, look, you're going to die. God's taking you. Like, you're done. That's enough. And Ahab realizes what his fault was. He repents, and he gets right with God, and Elijah comes back to him, and he's like, hey, Elijah, I did this. Please spare me. Tell God to spare me. And God does, but he says, look, I'll spare you, but your son's going to face ruin. Your son's going to face this negative ruin that's going to come upon him. And his son comes into power. And we go to 2 Kings here. So we skip forward, and that's just a lot of little stuff happens in Elijah's life. But in 2 Kings, verse 1, we find out that Ahaziah, Ahab's son, has fallen through the ceiling, the lattice of his upper room on his residence. And what Ahaziah does is he tells his people, he says, his messengers, he goes, go inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover from this sickness. So he goes and he says, okay, I'm gonna send away for this other god. And Elijah's like, the angel of God goes to Elijah and goes, go tell him he's an idiot. He's going to die. And he does. And Elijah goes and he stops the messenger. He says, go back to your king and tell him he's going to die. And Ahaziah gets mad, and he sends this captain out. He says, take 50 men with you and go get Elijah and bring him back here so I put him to death, basically. And Elijah's sitting up on a hill, and this captain comes to him, and this is my favorite story of Elijah. It's really kind of baller the way he just sits up on a hill, and the captain yells up, and he's like, hey, man of God, come down here so I can take you to my king. And Elijah looks at him, and he's like, if I'm a man of God, may God bring fire from heaven down and consume you and your 50. And what does God do? Brings fire from heaven again. At the word of Elijah. It's crazy because then this king, Ahaziah, is an idiot because he's like, that happened? Okay, cool. I'm going to send another captain. Like, why? Your guy just died. Like, I imagine like the scene from Princess Bride when the guy comes at Andre the Giant and he's like, get out or I'll call the brute squad. And he's like, I'm on the brute squad. And after the guy dies, he's like, oh, you are the brute squad. Like, for real, that's like what I imagine. Like, how dumb is that? Like, don't come at somebody like that. You know what he's capable of. And he still sends another captain. The second captain comes out and is like, man of God, does the exact same thing. Come down. And Elijah's like, all right, fine. If I'm a man of God, may God send fire from heaven and consume you and your 50. And he does it again. And then Ahaziah's like, whatever, go. And this third captain's like, nah, man, I'm out. And he goes and he begs Elijah, like, look, my king sent me. Please come with me. I don't want to, like, any problems. I don't want any troubles. Just come with me. And he does. And Elijah goes, hey, go back to your king. Tell him he's going to die. And he does. And Ahaziah dies. And then we shift. Because, see, Elijah had this experience where he questioned God. He had an experience when he was depressive and he was struggling, even though God had provided for him. And now he's having this experience where God has restored him and he is ending his life. He and Elisha are walking together across the land, and every town they come to, the prophets in that town say, hey, Elisha, you know that Elijah's about to die. And Elisha's like, hey, stop. I know what's going on. Just let us go. And they come to the next town, they do the same thing. And they get all the way to Jericho. And as they leave Jericho, Elijah takes off his cloak. He hits it on the Jordan. The Jordan opens up and they walk across. And as they're walking, Elisha asks for a blessing, twice of what Elijah got from God. And Elijah says, as long as you're with me when I go, then that's going to happen. And then this wonderful story of they're walking and a chariot of fire comes from heaven and takes them. to heaven to be with God. Here we have Elijah who has walked faithfully with God. And it hasn't been easy. But the point of this whole story of Elijah that I'm getting at is it doesn't matter what we did. It matters that we continue to push forward to walk with God. That we are living out the calling on our life that God has placed. What is our calling? Well, the verse that we use for our church is in Mark 1:17. It says, and Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And there's 3 parts to that this church follows. Number 1, you have to follow Jesus. Maybe you're here right now, and you don't follow Jesus. Maybe you used to follow Jesus, and you stopped following Jesus. Whatever it is, the truth is that before we can ever face the kind of joy and the kind of restoration that Elijah faced, we have to know Jesus. The Jesus that came to this earth, fully God and fully man, took our sins upon himself because we are sinners that cannot save ourselves. We are condemned to die. That is the wages of our sin is death. Eternal separation from God. And we're called to believe that Jesus did that for us and that he was risen from the dead. And because of that, he takes away our sins. We have to make him Lord, being a Lord over our lives so that we are his follower. We follow him wherever he calls us to go. And I can tell you, if you're not in that relationship with God, it's the greatest decision you'll ever make. The greatest decision on earth. It may not be easy. It may not look the way that you think it is. But when you get to the end of something, you look back and you're like, that went way better than I thought it would. That was way more joyful than it should have been. My life is much more full than it should have been because we're following him. So we follow him as he makes us. So maybe you have made that decision. What are you doing to grow? What are you doing to be plugged in with other believers that are walking alongside you? This big push for our church is discipleship. If you don't have a place where you're walking along other believers, I challenge you today to get there. The men's group that I'm a part of has been one of the greatest things in my life. I haven't had that in 7 years, 8 years since I've been really walking with Christ again, and he's been molding me into this pastor that I'm becoming. I haven't had that, and I came here, and it's been amazing to sit down with other men who are honest and truthful about their life and what's going on. And it's built me up, and it's sustained me, and it's helped me grow. And that's what being a part of a community is. That's what being a part of a Christian community does for you. It helps you grow to this place where we do the next step. We become fishers of men. Taking a grad class right now on evangelism. I mentioned worship and evangelism as one. I've had to read full books in the last 2-3 weeks. And one of them was talking about that fact right there, that when you share your faith, when you share your story, you're worshiping God. You're doing what he's called you to do. Elijah found his call and he followed God. And yes, it wasn't an easy one. It wasn't always perfect. And he struggled. But he did as God commanded him. And he came out on the other side, made righteous in God's eyes. Not on his own will, but on God's. That's it. That's where we are. So today, as the band and Joe come back up, my challenge is this. We don't usually do this big, let's sit and have a time of response, but I really want to today. What is God calling you to? Who is God calling you to? As Bill led us in prayer this morning, he asked that God would reveal someone in your life that is needing this good news. Who is God calling you to? What is your call in this life? Maybe you haven't accepted Christ, and I want to offer that to you. You don't have to come talk to me. You don't have to talk to Bill. There are people all around you that would love to talk to you. If you're not comfortable coming down to the front, that's okay. But I can tell you this, there's no more joy than being able to share what God's done in your life and what God is doing in your life at that moment. So I would challenge you to reach out to somebody around you. Reach out to me or Bill up here in the front. Maybe you need to get plugged in. Maybe you don't have a place where you're plugged in. I would challenge you to reach out. Talk to a pastor, talk to someone that you know is in a small group, and see if you can be a part of that. And I challenge you, small group leaders, to be open, have open arms, and say, come on, we want you to be a part of this, because that's what we're called. Are we going to be like Elijah? Are we going to follow Christ? Or are we going to follow our own way? Pray. Dear Father, thank you for this day, and I just pray that we would accept this challenge, whether it's to follow you for the first time, whether it's